Welcome to the hrQ Insight Series. My name is Carrie Sue Bench, and I am a consulting advisory leader at hrQ. And I have Brian Wilkerson here with me today to discuss the dynamics surrounding the human capital supply chain. Brian, can you share with us a little bit about your background and tell us what is happening in human capital today?
Certainly. Thank you, Carrie Sue. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am the leader of the consulting practice for hrQ. I've been doing consulting for about the past 28 years as a leader in large firms and the owner of small firms, working primarily in the intersection of strategy, operations, and human capital. In terms of trends, these times are really unprecedented. Organizations are having to redefine their human capital strategies, not only because of COVID, but also because of the many changes in the economy, the political landscape, changing expectations, et cetera. We're seeing a wave of resignations. Many people are calling it the Great Resignation as people rethink what they want to do. And there's a lot of dynamics that organizations are having to deal with. In addition, we've all heard of the disruptions in the supply chain and the effect that they're having on the economy overall and the ability of producers to produce, et cetera. The same is true for human capital. We're seeing shortages in supply, rising cost, disruptions, unpredictability, and the disruption in the traditional supply chain and the accompanying disruptions in the human capital supply chain really reinforce each other and make it very challenging for organizations. So we've been working with our clients over the past several months to really help them manage human capital the same way they manage traditional supply chains. Very disciplined modeling using predictive analytics, deeper analysis of costs and trade-offs, better contingency planning, et cetera. So we believe looking at human capital as a supply chain is a really important tool for organizations to leverage. And to be clear, we're not talking about, buying big software here, et cetera. Most of what we're trying to do from a human capital supply chain modeling perspective can be done with tools that organizations have now. But the key is really having the right math behind it and be able to do scenario models as conditions change, like you would with a traditional supply chain.
That's really interesting, Brian. So, what are some of the key considerations that organizations need to be thinking about right now?
Well, when you look at human capital as a supply chain, and we've got this slide to hit some of the key points, looking at supply and demand at a much deeper level than organizations traditionally do is very important. For example, on the supply side, trying to look at availability of key skills in the market, where you can get them from, how much they cost, looking at even just overall in the whole supply chain, which would be the whole U.S. labor market, where are the supply that you need, where are the people that you need in order to be able to drive the business outcomes you need, understanding things like cost to replace and time to replace and how long it takes to get people to proficiency is really important. And even on the demand side, understanding how you need to produce whatever it is you produce, whether it's goods or whether it's services, understanding how that varies over time, what service levels you need to deliver, your costs, all of those different components are really important. When you're looking at the human capital supply chain, it's similar to a traditional supply chain in terms of trying to balance the probability and the cost of surplus with the probability and cost of shortage. And so when you look at these different elements, you want to make sure that you move kind of beyond our traditional knee-jerk decisions related to human capital. What I mean by that is in many organizations, if we have too few people, we go hire. If we have too many people, we lay them off. And we want to move beyond that and really start thinking about a deeper set of considerations. Things like carrying cost. If I have a temporary surplus of labor, what does it cost me to carry that? And compare that to what it looks like in terms of time and cost to acquire. How predictable is our demand? If I lay off people today, am I going to be able to get them back when I need them? And how certain am I about the future demand and whether this is truly a surplus or not? I even want to look at what our competitors are doing and what the industry is looking like as I'm thinking about supply chain considerations. So overall, looking at a much broader set of criteria and integrating all those different considerations into the modeling that you're doing around the human capital supply chain. And then it even extends to thinking differently about strategies. So for example, if you've got some kind of surplus in labor, thinking about tactics like modified work schedules or, other sorts of ways to reduce the carrying costs of those rather than just going to laying off. If you've got shortages of workers, looking at things like retraining, looking at, outsourcing, looking at different ways to smooth out volume to help make it so that you can handle demand with the labor that you have. All of those are different strategies that organizations can look at beyond sort of the traditional, two-trick pony in terms of how we look at supply chain.
That's really insightful. So as leaders look to the future, where should they focus their strategy?
Really, there's three areas that leaders should be looking at when you're thinking about the human capital supply chain. The first is automation, and that includes things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. You really have to start with a look at where your risk is from a human capital perspective. Where could you encounter shortages of labor? Where could you encounter disruptions in supply? And look at opportunities to automate in those areas to help mitigate some of that risk and hopefully also reduce costs over time. It also will help sort of free the human capital that you have up to hopefully do higher value add work. This is also a good time to be looking at how artificial intelligence and machine learning applications can really help mitigate some of those risks as well as enhance your productivity and enhance that supply chain. The second component is really looking at your labor sourcing strategy, similar to what you would look at your overall supply chain strategy. So what are how do I have a mix of onshore, offshore, and nearshore resources from a labor supply chain perspective? Even looking at, a key thing that a lot of organizations are looking at today, what does my remote workforce versus my on-site workforce look like? And how do I balance sort of risk, availability, productivity, all of those different factors when I'm looking at that? So really looking at kind of that location strategy, that sourcing strategy, and making sure that that's all in the right place. And then lastly, really making sure that we have much more robust contingency strategies in place from a labor perspective. It could be as simple as things like having, on-call lists or more flexible labor, et cetera. But we're really encouraging clients to take a more robust look at contingency planning from a human capital perspective and mirror it up to more, the discipline that they put into supply chain contingency planning. All of this is really with the focus on building agility and resilience in organizations. And organizations really need to focus on those twin concepts because they balance each other out. But to survive, the rest of the pandemic and whatever comes next, it's really important for organizations to balance that agility and resilience component and be measuring those in the progress that they're making against them.
Well, this has definitely been an important topic to be thinking about. Thank you, Brian, for taking your time today, and we look forward to future hrQ Insight sessions.
Thank you. Appreciate it.